I love sharing stories about once a slave entrepreneurs. How did an enslaved man buy his freedom and become one of America's wealthiest black people? Stephen Smith was born near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in Dauphin County around 1795, the son of a slave woman, Nancy Smith, and unknown father. Some reports have young Stephen separated from his mother and sold to a new slave master, a lumber merchant, and others claim that he was indentured to General Thomas Bodie in 1801, when he was 4 or 5 years old. What we do know is that here he learned the lumber business, and Bodie, a former Revolutionary War officer from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, allowed the hard-working and intelligent young man to manage his entire lumber business as Smith approached manhood. Therefore, in 1816, at the age of 21, Smith did several things. He either saved or borrowed $50 and used it to purchase his freedom. He obtained release from his indenture. He married Harriet Lee, and he opened a lumber business in Columbia, Pennsylvania, that soon prospered. Since Smith was already equipped with entrepreneurial skills to operate a lumber business, it was no wonder that he excelled at it. But the ambitious Smith also became involved in the lucrative real estate market, while his equally savvy wife operated an oyster and refreshment house. Smith prospered, and in the 1830s he, like several other antebellum blacks, were members of various boards. For Smith, it was service on the Columbia Bank Board. He may have been the bank's largest shareholder. Yet he could not become president due to the bank's rules preventing blacks from holding that post. His status, however, allowed him to name the white man who would be president. In 1830, Smith became the chair of the African American Abolitionist Organization in Columbia. Smith was actively involved in civil rights activities early on. He opposed the policies of the American Colonization Society and demonstrated his opposition in 1831 in Columbia. In 1834, Smith joined with other abolitionists as one of the first black agents for the Freeman's Journal and later the Emancipator to promote and secure subscriptions to the papers. Smith's success in real estate ventures and work as an abolitionist disturbed whites. The Columbia Spy newspaper reported that in 1835, Smith's success, quote, excited the envy or hatred of those not so prosperous and of the ruling race, end quote. In that year, unknown persons vandalized his office and destroyed his papers, records, and books. This inspired a black race riot in August and another in October that year. Whites wanted to frighten Smith and force him and other black real estate owners to sell their property below market value and leave town. They also accused Smith of inflating the value of his properties. Smith received a letter in 1835 that stated, quote, "You must know that your presence is not agreeable, and the less you appear in the assembly of the whites, the better it will be for your black hide, as there are a great many in this place that would think your absence from it a benefit. As you are considered an injury to the real value of property in Columbia, you'd better take the hint," end quote. Smith became a target for verbal and physical attacks. Shortly after this incident, Smith moved to Philadelphia, where he again entered the lumber business and after a few years regained his prosperity. Though Smith moved to Philadelphia in the late 1830s, he continued to hold extensive real estate and lumber enterprises in Columbia. He maintained the business there with his partner William Whymper in charge. Both men were astute businessmen, building a successful lumber business in Columbia. But just as important, they were both dedicated to the risky work of the Underground Railroad. These two abolitionist businessmen mercifully escaped bodily harm and jail sentences for secreting slaves to freedom using the rail lines. Urban land transportation was a growing enterprise in the antebellum period, and several blacks had their own rail cars. Both Stephen Smith and William Goodrich of York, Pennsylvania, seized the opportunity to benefit from the railroad by establishing their own railroad enterprises. By 1850, Smith's firm had 22 fine merchantman cars that ran from Philadelphia to Baltimore. Both Smith and Goodrich aided fugitive slaves who had escaped the South by hiding them in a false end of a boxcar. He also owned a steamship that was occasionally enlisted to help runaway slaves escape to the North. The Columbia incident and the general prejudice against Northern blacks inspired Smith to redouble his efforts to abolish slavery throughout the nation, which he and other abolitionists of the time considered the source of anti-black prejudice and violence. As the abolitionist movement grew in the Philadelphia area in the 1830s, however, so did the opposition. When abolitionists found it difficult to secure a building to hold their meetings, Smith acquired the Pennsylvania Hall for their use. An anti-abolitionist mob burned the hall in 1838. Ironically, Smith, taking advantage of a little-known Pennsylvania statute that held the municipality liable for damage to property sustained by mob action, Smith sued the city of Philadelphia and recovered $75,000 in damages, which exceeded the building's value at the time of its destruction. In Philadelphia, Smith increased his real estate investments and became even more successful. He became involved in land speculation and development. In addition to the real estate that he owned in Columbia and Lancaster County, he owned 52 brick homes in Philadelphia. Black Steve, as he came to be known, made wise choices that was held in high regard as a real estate dealer. He sought out bargains when property changed hands and was around to bid on property to be sold. In time, his properties in Philadelphia were valued at $50,000 in 1840s money. He entered into a partnership with Ulysses B. Waddell, his wife's nephew, and they owned a large coal and lumber yard in Philly. The wealthy Smith owned $18,000 then money worth of stock in the Columbia Railroad. His wealth led him to invest $9,000 in the Columbia Wrightsville Bridge in the 1850s. The bridge was burned in 1863 to prohibit Confederate soldiers from reaching Lancaster County during the Civil War. Smith filed a claim for losses with the federal government, but neither the bank nor its investors were ever compensated. Tirelessly, Smith continued his abolitionist activities until the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. When the atmosphere in the country turned violent, he was persuaded, along with his business partner, William Whymper, and about 15,000 other black Americans to move to Canada. After the Civil War, Smith returned to Philadelphia and continued to speak out for African American civil rights and to resume his wealth building. The Smiths lived well at the center of the acclaimed black elite in Philadelphia. They owned a lavish home on Lombard Street, purchased from their friend Robert Purvis, who was also a wealthy black entrepreneur there. Stephen and Harriet Smith also owned a summer home in Cape May, New Jersey. You see here that during the Victorian era, a wealthy black elite lived the American dream. In addition to all else we know of Smith, he was a man of religion and became an ordained minister in 1838, always giving back to the community. In 1857, the estimated annual sales of Smith's company was $100,000. That's $2.7 million in today's dollars, and his personal wealth was valued at $500,000, which amounts to $13.7 million in 2018 dollars. In an 1868 letter to the Columbia Spy newspaper, a white Philadelphian stated that his fellow Philadelphian, Stephen Smith, quote, whose wealth was almost equal to the combined wealth of the entire democracy of Columbia, end quote. Yes, a wealthy and successful man, but Smith was far more. He was described as a mulatto of medium size and a strong build with pronounced features. He was said to be a quiet, stubborn man who lived by his Christian creed. He remained courageous and patient, even as he survived occasional white persecution, and he used his wealth to help others. Smith died in Philadelphia in 1873. His death brought public recognition for his efforts in race reform and his success as a wealthy black entrepreneur.